Oh, really? Okay, then I will not hit my notes. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for another panel on racial justice and equality. We convened this same panel about a month ago and had some really incredible feedback from you audience members. A lot of people found what they heard in this panel to be informative and moving. And so we are coming back for more. I want to introduce our panelists again briefly. We have Daryl Davis with us. Daryl Davis is an activist and a musician. He's helped over 200 people leave the KKK, which is a truly astonishing achievement. He's author of Clandestine Relationships, and he hosts a podcast called Changing Minds with Daryl Davis. We have Baratunde, who's on my extreme right. He's author of How to Be Black, best-selling book. He's an author, an activist, a comedian, and he's hosting currently a show called Live on Lockdown. We have Rev D, Reverend Deborah Johnson. She's an activist and a minister and a speaker and author of The Sacred Yes and founder and president of Inner Light Ministries. And Breonna Jenkins, activist and public speaker in Austin. And she is the co-director of New Leaders Council Austin Chapter Board and host of Tea with Bree, which is a podcast. So I'm going to ask a first question, which is kind of an amalgamation. It seemed as I was reading through audience questions, the question that most people were asking. And so this is a mashup. I'm not crediting any individual with this. And it made me reflect briefly this question on, I studied social theory and social change in college. And one of the things that I remember studying was the fact that power structures will often create safety valves where they can let off a little steam when a social movement gets too powerful. They let off a little steam and that diffuses the energy, and so they can maintain the status quo. And we all are witnessing right now that the protests are dwindling a bit and people are moving on with their lives a bit. And there is some small legislative action that's already taking place. We're having conversations about removing Confederate statues, and some major metropolitan police departments are having their funding cut by a few percentage points. But I think a lot of people, based on these questions, are worrying that these small gestures and general fatigue are going to take the wind out of the sails of the Black Lives Matter movement right now, and that we're not going to see real, sustained, meaningful change. And so the question is, how do we keep the momentum going, and how do we make sure that we see lasting, meaningful change from this movement? And whomever would like to start may start.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Burton.
I think we make sure that this is not just a moment by making sure this is not just a moment. I'm humbled by the size of the challenge that we are up against, which is not just the challenge of responding adequately to Derek Chauvin slowly murdering George Floyd, or any number of police officers murdering specific Black people, but hundreds of years of a system to deny us our humanity. And smarter, more resourced, more dedicated people than us have taken on this challenge. And it's not that they have failed, it's that the hole we're in is so deep. The debt we have is so deep as a society. It's going to take a while to dig out. This is a multi-generational challenge. So my first thought is we should be humble before the size of the challenge and not expect that because of a recent flare-up around this infection of white supremacy, we're going to be cured of the disease. We can, however, make meaningful progress. And so I find hope in the resistance to the resistance. Oh, power feels threatened. They're starting to say what they really think. There's all this footage going around now of police in North Carolina saying the most heinous things imaginable. You had a great presentation here in the city of Los Angeles of the people's budget with a wonderful articulation of why we waste so many dollars on burdening police with the total job of public safety with the limited resources of guns. So we have to keep the pressure up on that. And I think checking back in a month to see, like, has your white silence sign faded in your front lawn? Have you no longer communicated with your city council? Is your Instagram feed back to influencers going to influence on sourdough recipes? That's a sign of waning, and it's an opportunity to reconnect and recommit to the size of the problem that we're trying to face, which is not going to be resolved in one summer of intense activism.
Thank you. Daryl, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Baratunde just said. And one of the topics that's, pretty much on the mind of a lot of people are the terms, defund the police, reform the police, et cetera. I think two of the things that need to happen is we need a national registry for the police. Police who have been accused and convicted of misconduct or fired for misconduct, whether it's murder or anything egregious, because right now we do not have that. And what happens is, in the rare instances that they get fired, they simply go to another department and they are rehired. It's sort of like, the priests, not all priests, but the priests who do abuse kids, they get shuffled around from parish to parish with no consequence, and until maybe 40 years later or something. But the same thing has happened with police. If that is their modus operandus, they're going to continue that at the next department. Just like when people go to prison and they're not reformed there, chances are when they get out, they're going to repeat what they know, because a prison is not a reformatory, it is a penal institution. And unless they take it upon themselves to be more responsible when they get out, they usually end up back where they went. That's why we have such a high rate of recidivism in this country. So we do have a child sex offender, child molester, sex offender registry. So if you're convicted of a sex crime in New York City and you go out to Los Angeles and try to get a job at a kindergarten or Boy Scout troop or something like that, they look on the registry, boom, your name is there. No, you do not get this job. We need the same thing for police. And that will definitely curtail some of those egregious acts that these people have committed at other departments. Also, I believe that we need some mechanism for the police to blow the whistle with no ramifications or repercussions. Sort of like we, the regular citizens, when police cannot solve a crime, they'll usually put out some kind of advertisement saying, if you have information on this crime, please call this number. You can call anonymously. There's a reward or whatever. And because people don't want their name identified if they leave information out of fear of retaliation. Well, you have three kinds of police officers. Mostly we talk about two kinds, the good cops and the bad cops, but there's a third category. And that third category is a very small category, a minority category. I don't mean minority in color or ethnicity. I mean minority in terms of number, percentage. We all know what bad cops do. However, good cops will not do those things, but a good cop will not tell on the bad cop. He or she will turn a blind eye to that. They might not participate, but they won't tell. And the reason why they won't tell is that blue code of silence, because nobody likes a snitch. And when you snitch on your fellow police officer in blue, you suffer consequences from your fellow police officers. You might go out on a call and there's a shootout or something and you call for backup. You know, your transmission goes over the airwaves to any cops in the area. They're going to be very slow to respond, if they respond, because they recognize you as that snitch and they don't care. You might remember Frank Serpico. A movie was made about him called Serpico. That was an honest cop. That's that majority that we don't talk about are the honest cops, the one who will put their lives at risk from their fellow officers who will tell. But then who do they tell? They tell the brass, you know, the people who've moved up from the street up into the administration part of the police and internal affairs. And that's where the leaks come. And it leaks back down onto the street so everybody knows who the snitch was. And how is it that you're going to have the police investigate the police? So because those, not all of them, but many of those cops in internal affairs were doing the exact same thing that you're complaining about 20 years ago when they were down on the street. So just like a jury, if a doctor is on trial at in a jury trial or a police officer, the first thing during voir dire that the prosecutor asks is are there any police officers in the jury? Or anybody married to a police officer? You got a family member who's a police officer or a doctor or whatever, that person is excused. And another juror is brought in so that there is no bias in that jury. Well, when you have internal affairs, you have police investigating the police. And that's why they're so rarely punished by the police. Like Derek Chauvin had 18 complaints in 19 years because nobody listened. Now, if there was a mechanism, and then when people come on in those rare instances where a cop, you know, is caught with his hand in the cookie jar or whatever, as Derek Chauvin was, then people will say, well, you know, in a department this large, there are bound to be a few bad apples. Well, I'm sorry, there are more bad apples than there are good apples, because if the good apples outweighed the bad apples, they would get rid of the bad apples. Because no good cop wants his badge tarnished by one lone officer who does something stupid and then causes the whole community to paint the entire department with a broad brush. See, you know, just like, you know, you got a basketball team, a football team. If one of those players is not doing their job, they go to the coach, get that guy benched, and bring out another player who will, you know, be a team player and get the job done, get the game won. So those good cops need a mechanism by which they can report the bad behavior of their fellow cops and break that blue wall of silence without fear of retaliation.
Yeah, that sounds very, very clearly true. I think there are a lot of very specific policies that could be implemented that could help. I mean, you mentioned defund police, and Baratunde, you elliptically referenced it, just saying that we're stretching the police and asking them to do everything. Is that, Rev D, is that something that you, well, I mean.
Well, I'd like to address the larger question about the movement and how do you keep the movement going, and this concern that people have about whether or not they're going to stay interested in it. That's not a question that's coming from the African American community. Let's just be honest about it, because we don't have the option not to. So when you're in a situation and it's so pervasive as to be everywhere within your life, you don't have the privilege to ignore it. Okay. So what I really hear the question being is people who want to be allies, quote unquote, people who are feeling something right now, concerned about their own momentum, as well as the momentum of friends or other people who may be also trying to be quote unquote allies at this moment. I would say that the tide turns, and I'm not just talking about here, but I'm talking about movement building and what it takes to move to do the movement building. You have to have some skin in the game. I think part of the problem here is that we keep defining racism as being about discrimination, as though discrimination is the point of racism. Discrimination is the tool of racism. Part of what I found so glorious about the marching that's been taking place in the street around Black Lives Matters is that what I was seeing in these multi-generational, multicultural, multi-ethnic, marches that were going on day after day after day is the words coming out of their mouths were Black Lives Matters. But the subcontext of that they were also saying is white supremacy has to go. White supremacy has to go. They weren't articulating it like that, but you could tell that we had reached this tipping point. Now, whether it's defund the police or not defund the police, and I think there's a lot of reasons to look at how we appropriate our funds and where they should go. But to me, the larger issue here and why I'm pleased that these kinds of discussions are taking place is because racism has two components. There's the prejudice, there's the attitudinal component, but then there's the structural component. And we pay far too much attention to just the attitudes and not the structures. So when you start seeing things like quote unquote defund the police, what's really happening underneath there, and I think if people understand what they're doing, they might be able to stay more committed to it. There's this place where complicity equals collusion. And I think they were getting that their silence was collusion. But there goes one step further where your collusion becomes enabling. So if you're talking about something like defunding the police, the way you keep the momentum going is you look at your role in this. That if you're talking about any policy like defunding the police, what you're really saying is that we're not at the mercy. We don't have to sit around and watch this happen. Furthermore, this is happening on our watch with our money. And here's the key part, supposedly for our benefit. And that's the untold piece of the racism or any ism. It's not just the discrimination. Like I say, that's just a tool. The point of sexism is not to keep women down. The point of sexism is the patriarchy is to elevate men, and the keeping women down is just the tool of the upliftment. It's the same thing racially, but nobody wants to pay attention to that. Nobody wants to pay attention to the fact that all of this has been designed and created to uplift, and the slavery or the denigration or whatever that is just the tool of the upliftment. So the way you stay in the game is you say, this has something to do with me. This has something to do, this isn't just, I'm not just being an ally for these people over here. This isn't the world that I want. This doesn't represent me. This is not where I want my money to go. This isn't the kind of world that I want my children to live in. This is not the legacy that I want to leave. This isn't the kind of people that I want us to be. This policing stuff says something about me. This is my money. This is being done under my name, supposedly for my benefit. And this goes beyond being an ally. Okay, this is when you are in partnership because you realize that your destinies are intertwined. And that to me is this crossroads moment that we're at. Will our white allies come to recognize that this has something to do with them.
I feel like the stream is complete. Like nobody really needs to say anything else.
We can end now.
That was very good.
That was so beautifully articulated. Brianna, would you like to add anything?
I would like to try, but like Baratunde said, it's like
tough to follow.
Listening to all of you speak, for me, the main things I'm coming away just from hearing that is dedication, accountability, and solidarity. And I think that's what's really changed this movement really now during this time. I mean, we still have people out there, all of us still wanting justice for Breonna Taylor. Like, the work is not done, but we already see how her name is having to keep being brought up because there is no justice for her. And we're still trying to get justice for George. And just hearing all of this of how can white allies show up, I think that's like Rev D was saying, what is the root of what we're talking about? It's dismantling the system. It is having these conversations. It is having these conversations offline and not just posting about it. Like, the people in your community, in your circle, how are you keeping this conversation going? How are you reading White Fragility and all these other books and using those tools to have those conversations with people in your own environment and taking it to your job and making sure you're diversifying more. And it's not just in your circles, but in your community as a whole, paying attention, listening to city council meetings, speaking up, protesting. Like, there are so many different ways to keep this going. And I think, we can get really bogged down if it's not in vogue and at the forefront of our view, we kind of start to forget about it. And so I ask that people start holding their people accountable, start continuing having these conversations and not just waiting for someone to post about it or waiting for an opportune moment to talk about it. Every minute another person probably is dying at the hands of the police. Every minute is a good minute to talk about this stuff and not just waiting for the cues or feeling like that's when your chance is.
So I'd like to just briefly, if it's all right with you, have you all just define a couple or terms or explain a couple of things, because I think there are a couple of terms that are getting bandied about that not everyone fully understands. One of them is defund police. I think a lot of people have the perception that means shut down all police departments. There's nobody to show up for a domestic violence call. So I think it's important that people have a clearer understanding of what the root of that term is. And then there's another term. I got a question from Katie. Wait, nope, sorry, that's the wrong question. Bear with me 1 second. Burgundy. I believe all human life matters, and that in order to change our country and the future of the country, we must unite as a human race. We all matter, and when you grow up marginalized one race over the other, when you marginalize one race over the other, you are just like the segregationists of the past. I grew up poor in my family. Both my parents were addicts, and I didn't have any privileges that made life easier. And it's something that was echoed in several questions that I got. And I think the root of the question there is, my life feels really hard. There are a lot of struggling white people who are poor and they feel disenfranchised and they don't feel like they have white privilege. So I would love for you to explain more clearly what that term means to people who feel perplexed by it.
Can I'll jump in on the defund the police one, because I understand some of that confusion. When I first heard the phrase, I was like, you want to what? Like all police? Like what, all money? What about murder? By non-police, which is still an issue. And I've actually, Misha didn't even know this when you introduced me, but I launched a podcast just today called We're Having a Moment. And we're kind of defining some of the pillars of this time. There's a whole episode on defund the police. To condense it a little bit, I'll say this. Policing in this country was not born out of a desire to create public safety or improve public health. It was created out of a desire and need to control certain populations. And that's a fact. Slave patrols is the origin story of policing in the United States. And we have adapted this force over 100 years, and now at the tune of $100 billion a year, imbued them with a ton of power to solve a lot of problems. Domestic violence calls, as was mentioned earlier, wellness checks on elders, kids acting up in school, help me across the street, my neighbor's stereo's too loud. And we have overprescribed one solution to this, which is like send most likely a man with a gun, and a lot of guns, like Call of Duty level guns that have been donated and purchased at great discounts from our military into certain communities to be policed. And even many police officers will say, like, I'm not trained for this. I don't know how to deal with that. But we load them up. When crime goes up, we increase our police budgets. And there's a certain logic to that. Well, crimes have been going down for decades, and we're still increasing our police budgets. So what's the logic to that? How do you increase the budget regardless of the outcome of the department who's supposed to be doing something with that money? So it's a disconnected universe. And on top of all this power that we've imbued police with, we have stripped away, for all intents and purposes, all accountability. 1,000 Americans a year. That's the number that police in this country kill every year. And it's been steady through all this protest, through the hashtag, through the hoodies, through everything. That number stays steady. So the budgets go up, the murders stay the same, and the accountability, there's rarely charges. When you get charges, it's because people out in the streets and a couple buildings have burned. Breonna Taylor's, the officers that killed her, many of them still not being held to account. Some of the officers involved in killing George Floyd back out at the grocery store this week. So we see this image of an excess amount of power and no accountability. And to me, what it is, it sort of scratches at a core principle of what we're supposed to be about in the US, which is we're supposed to have checks and balances. We literally threw a revolution back in the day because there was a government with way too much power and no accountability. And these genius founders whipped up a little system inspired by the Renaissance and the Romans and a few other folks back in the day to say we got to divide this power, have one group check another group so nobody gets out of hand. And we have done the opposite with law enforcement. We've said, here's all the power in the world, the power to take someone's life, the power to somehow get shields for your face when the doctors don't have them, the power to launch chemical weapons at a crowd of peaceful protesters. And when you abuse that power, we're going to shuffle you around to a new department if you lose your job in any permanent sense to begin with. We're not going to charge you with a crime. You're not going to do any serious time. So what's the incentive to change behavior when there's no consequences for bad behavior? So defund the police says, look. Yes, we have a lot of problems, but an armed, unaccountable, most likely man is not the solution to all of them. And cities all across the country, number one allocation from the city government is a police department. So we're basically living in a police state. We can do better. Defund the police says, let's allocate money to the experts who know how to solve those problems. School teachers, social workers, public health officials, good paying jobs, clean air, things that cause stress, which make people dial 911 to begin with. We could solve them through some other departments. And I think in this world, we will still have armed law enforcement. We will still have detectives who investigate crime. We will still have the functions of policing, but severely restricted, because we got to reduce that surface area of contact between what is an overfunded department, $100 billion a year for policing in the United States. It would cost at most $80 billion to send everybody to college for free. So what are we doing with this money?
And that doesn't count the 80 billion a year that we spend incarcerating people.
Oh, that's right. Thank you, Misha. That's a whole nother thing. And it's all connected. I can go for a while on this, but I also think, Rev D, thank you. I said this the last time we gathered and you did it again. And so you're just like 2 for 2. You're batting 1,000. This idea of all of this is being done in certain people's names. And the police, Patrice Cullors, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matters, put it this way: there are certain communities that bear the brunt of policing. There are others who gain the benefit. And the communities where you feel the safest and it's the loosest don't have a ton of police presence, because those police are crushing other communities with stop and frisk, with chokeholds, with all this stuff that we're just starting to see because the narrative has another author, which is through the cell phone coverage. And we can see that. Well, how many times have the police been lying about what that person did? He reached for his gun. Really? Okay, because the camera says there was no gun. He was pinned on his back. So how many other times you been lying? And so who's cool with that? Who's cool with saying, with this new knowledge, I just stand blindly with law enforcement, whether you're a politician or a taxpaying citizen or the head of a union? You got to start to question, like, this is all being done in my name for my safety, but you're breaking the backs of these people? That's not right. I don't want my tax dollars or my voice being used in that way.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. Everything that's been said is true. Needs to be said. I'll touch just a little bit on the defund, because I think it was very well articulated by Baratunde. But look at, when you're dealing with dismantling systems, they come down the same way they go up. So defund means it was funded. Okay, so you got to start there. Like, what are we funding? And there's something that's happened in this COVID environment that I think has made us much more conscious of our money and where it's going and what's important and our values. And we have this imbalance from what we spend on the military to what we spend on policing to what we spend on matters of social uplift. And King Jr. said it beautifully, that any nation that spends more on military than social upliftment is headed towards a moral and a spiritual bankruptcy. The United States, 5% of the world's population, spends 45% of the whole world's military. Okay, all of that channels all the way back down to policing. We spend $60,000 in the state of California to keep an adult in prison, $200,000 a year to keep a kid in prison. And we can't find $10,000 to educate them. So I would ask people to look at the defunding as a means of saying, what do we fund? And how do we get it all done? Not that there's no police, but the dollars that are going there, can they go some other places that might make it less necessary to have the police and actually be more effective than the police? This question around privilege is a big one. And at the risk of taking up too much time here, there's a quick little exercise that I do as a professional diversity trainer. Well, I will ask people in the room, how do they identify themselves? I'll ask them, out of the things that are most important to you that really inform your life, what are those things that are the biggest? And I say, give me the top 5. Well, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, whatever. And generally speaking, the majority of the people in the room are usually able-bodied people. And I'll ask them, how many of you said able-bodied? Wasn't even on the list. And then I ask them, how much of your day is influenced by the fact that you can see, that you can hear, that you can walk, that you're a certain height, that you have dexterity, all these different things. They say practically 100% of my day. I said, then why is it that didn't come up for you as an identity. And they say, because I don't have to think about it. And I said, that's the privilege. That's the privilege right there, where the infrastructure of society is so built for you that you don't have to think about it. You don't even see it. You don't even realize your advantage because there's nothing out there that's getting in your way of the basic things that you have to do. That is the privilege. Have you ever suddenly been on crutches or had a cast on your arm or something? Ooh, the world looks so much different. All of a sudden, you realize just how many steps there were. You realize just how heavy that door was. I mean, these things that you didn't pay attention to before. So just as it is with the physical infrastructure, so as it is with the social infrastructure. And that's the insidiousness of it, is that it's built so you don't see it. It's built so it's not an issue to you. So all of the people who are busy talking about the privileges that they don't have, they're using their privilege to tell me about the privileges that they don't have. But it is designed for them not to see it. And that's part of the collusion, because if they saw it, they'd be out in the streets. See, to keep these systems going, you need not only to oppress the marginalized people, you have to have the collusion, like the Blue Shield collusion. Those in the dominant position have to collude. And the only way that they're going to collude is if they don't see it. See, that's why this stuff that Baratuni was just talking about, the cell phones and whatnot, once they see it, they're like, oh my God, oh my God. But keeping white people ignorant about what's going on, and I'm not calling them dumb, but what I'm saying is hiding the reality from them of what's going on is part of the way that the system is perpetuated. And the privilege is in the not knowing. That's the biggest privilege, that ability to not have to deal, like I talked about in the beginning. That's the privilege.
Thank you.
I want to jump in here too. As a person with a background in social work and having become really involved in what's going on politically in the city I live in, and listening to the budget meetings and the conversations and how like 40% of all major cities spend their money on policing. And here in Austin, if we took only 8% of our budget from the police, we could completely alleviate homelessness here in Austin. A single digit number would end that. And we think about also being in the middle of this pandemic, if we take some of that money and, like we're saying, reallocate it to people who have lost their jobs, who can't afford to eat, who can't afford to pay their rent. There's so many things going on that we could take the money from the police, give it to the people who are properly trained to do this. And if we even break that down of how are we training our police? What is the training that goes into that? We are giving them, like you were saying, all these weapons, but they're not properly trained. If you think about the military, there is years of training and boot camp and stuff that they have to go to then know how to properly use everything. But we have police getting trained for 6 months to a year, and we're giving them military grade weaponry to go out and keep us safe. I mean, that doesn't equate to me, at least. And then to echo what Rev D was saying about privilege, to the amount of calls and texts that I've been getting from people who finally get it, and it's not Black people, but people who finally get it, and telling them, one, I don't have the space for your sadness because Black people have been mourning this for 400 years, but grab a seat, get a snacks in the back of the room, listen up, because we've been trying to change this for years. But like Rev D was saying, it's the privilege of not even realizing that you have privilege, and the target that Black people and people of color and differently abled people and all the other marginalized groups have to deal with. We are constantly grouped together. You don't go out just representing yourself. You go out representing every single person who looks like you, who identifies like you do. And there's just so much systematic pressure. And that's where stereotypes come from, of like the angry Black woman, or, you know, people who finally start to stick up for themselves. And it's supposed to be this sense of, you know, just being grateful for the bare minimum we're allotted. And so when I talk to people about their privilege, it's that whole thing of like, you woke up today and you didn't have to think about the fact that you walk out of this house, and as a white person, you are automatically believed, you're automatically given the benefit of the doubt, you're automatically given space, you're automatically seen as the smartest person in the room. And that could be a white person with no education versus a person with Black education in the same space, showing up, and the white person will always be talked to first, greeted first. I mean, if you even look at when resumes are submitted, you can submit the same resume with a white sounding name and a Black sounding name, and 9 times out of 10, the white person will be called first and the Black person's resume might get thrown out. Like, there are so many things in our system that white people don't even have to consider when they just go out and leave their house.
A real quick tag on what Brianna just said. I think there's also the word system rings a bell, and it can be very easy to take things personally and say, like, white privilege, they're talking about me, and I'm poor, and I got beat as a kid, and my house doesn't have heat, whatever the situation is. And it's not that in every single case that white person always wins. Is that the system is designed to make white people collectively win without putting in nearly as much effort. Just as the system is designed to, in general, make every man win without putting in nearly as much effort. It's not to say there's no man out there who's never suffered, but in this body, I get taken more seriously. And the system privileges me at a systemic level. So I think there is some mental trick that may help, which is to depersonalize this idea that we're all talking about you, specifically you. It's like, no, we're all living in a system that privileges people who look like you. And oftentimes that is you, and occasionally it isn't. But when you add up the numbers over years and years and years, it looks like these outcomes, which are totally unfair.
Thank you.
You know, Misha, you asked about people saying, well, you know, the human race matters. And so some of these people take offense when someone is walking with a sign that says, you know, Black Lives Matter or whatever. That's not meant to be offensive towards anybody else. All lives do matter, because, you know, they'll hold up their signs, all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter. Yes, that's true. But that cannot be true unless Black lives matter too, because Black lives are a part of all lives. And it seems like all lives matter except for the Black lives, or there's an exception there. And when they think that Black Lives Matter are just talking about solely Black lives, and they feel excluded because they're white, that's not the case at all. Because you ask them, you know, they will retaliate with all lives matter. And so you say, okay, you have a problem with the saying Black Lives Matter. Yes, because it excludes white lives, is their answer. And you say, well, what about, are you okay with Blue Lives Matter? Well, yeah. Well, wait a minute. What do Blue Lives Matter say about white people? Nothing. It says Blue Lives Matter. So you have a problem with somebody saying Black Lives Matter because white is not mentioned, but you don't have a problem with somebody saying Blue Lives where white's not mentioned either. So that points to the fact that you have a problem with the word Black. That's the problem. Incarceration. There are more Blacks in prison than white people. Part of the reason is the inequity in the judicial system. Part of the reason is lack of funds to afford adequate legal representation. But also part of the situation is when you incarcerate Black men, you are controlling the population, because those particular Black men are not reproducing while they're in prison. When I was a kid, the Black population was 12% in this country. I'm 62 years of age now. And still in 2020, the population is 12% in this country. So there's part of your systemic racism. Keep the population under control without being overt about it. So like in some other countries, if women gave birth to females, to be female babies, they would eliminate them. They wanted more males in order to repopulate.
I'd like to say something here. And I admit it's going to sound a little harsh, but I really think that it needs to be said. Part of the problem that we're having here, and we really see it playing out in our social political system, is that there are completely different realities about what this nation is. We have been schizophrenic since our origins, where simultaneously we are writing things about everybody's free and equal, while in the first article of the Constitution, making the provision for some people never being free. So we have this foundation where literally the balance of power has been around slave states, free states. There was a map that I saw of the people that had voted for Barack Obama, and it was a direct overlay of slave states, free states in 1850. There's something that's like fundamentally going on here in the way in which we are constructed and the realities. So here's the harsh thing. But I'm saying this because it's the best analogy that I can come up with. If you were to make an analogy between the Black Lives Matter, not Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement, what you would find, and I'm going to use this as an example, I may be raped by my father, who might be a banker, he could be the mayor, he could be the greatest philanthropist in the whole neighborhood, the whole county. And he's a rapist. It's this inability that we have to hold the juxtaposition between like the good things that's happening and the dark side. So nobody knows about the rape stuff. Nobody knows that. And if I try to say something about that, people are saying, well, he's upstanding. And, and he gives this much. Yeah, he does all that. Nobody's trying to take that away. When we talk about the dark side of the things that are happening, we're not trying to denigrate the good. We're trying to say, and. But here's the situation that we find ourselves in. That long after I, as this person who was raped by my father, have worked through that through therapy, I've forgiven him. He could be dead, but I'm still estranged from the family because of what my mother did, because of what everybody else did, their silence, their complicity, their unwillingness to listen, their unwillingness to believe, their constant, like, you're making this up and it can't be true. And that's the place that we have ourselves in now. Is it as angry as we've been about slavery? Like, why are they always talking about slavery? When we talk about slavery, we're not even talking about the slavery. When I talk about the fact that I was raped by my father, I'm not even talking about my father raping me. I'm talking about the way that we developed this dysfunction of the silence around it and the complicity around it, and where I'm somehow the bad person and I can't say anything because my experience is going to tarnish the good reputation of the family. And that's the position that we find ourselves in. It's like the marginalized people who have been suffering all this abuse. Yeah, America was great for some people. Fine. We're not even going to try to take that away. And it's like, and it's the and part. And we haven't developed the capacity to be able to hold the and. It's like we're stuck in this kind of immature. We're always right. We can do nothing wrong globally. We can't apologize. That makes it look like we're weak. You know, you don't make it amends. You never say that something was off or something wrong because we've got this image of like we're powerful and we're great. That's got to stop. And we have to grow up and develop the capacity to stand in that and to look at it all simultaneously. And that's where a lot of the frustration is right now, not over the past, but the unwillingness of our so-called friends to realize there's no Santa Claus. And right now we're weary of the burden of trying to help you stay ignorant, to keep you sanitized from it. We're weary. And we're saying, let's just look. We're not even blaming you. We're not blaming you personally. You didn't rape me. But if you keep silencing me, then you're colluding with it. And then when you tell me you don't see me, well, I don't see color. Well, I can't see that you're a girl. I can't see that you're a female in this situation because I just see people. Then you can't stop me from being raped. Telling me you don't see me doesn't make me feel better. Just breathe. I know that was hard, but the roof is on fire now. You know, we don't have time. We just don't have time to dance around this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, though, I do see a page turning with all the different colors joining in the protests, more so than we've ever seen before. And also the fact that we're having a ripple effect that we've never seen before. Well, while the protests were geared initially and predominantly towards the police, the ripple effect being a lot of other racist entities or brands, if you will, are changing. You're finding NASCAR banning the Confederate flag, certain statues being removed, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's rice changing their brand names. These are things that these ripple effects, residual effects, have never happened before to this degree. That's a good thing. Taking the statues down or banning the flag is not going to change the attitudes of people who admire and worship those things or hold them near and dear to their hearts for racist reasons or whatever reasons. But they do need to be removed. And people need to be educated, and these things need to be put in our school system so that kids are educated at an early age what transpired in this country, the good, the bad, the shameful, and the ugly. All of our history needs to be there. No omissions, no lies. And you educate people, then they can understand the significance of those statues. The loser, I'm not saying the statues need to be destroyed, even though most of them were put up as a slap in the face to integration and things like that in the 1960s and that era, not immediately during the Civil War or whatever. But they can be taken. I'm not saying they should be destroyed. They can be taken and put in some Confederate memorial park or in a museum. People can go there and do whatever they want to do with them there. But they should not be flying over state capitals like in South Carolina a few years back and things like that, because they do not represent the entire state. As I said, taking them down or removing them does not change the attitudes, but it's a start. The loser does not get to build his or her statues or fly their flag. We went to war against Great Britain. That's why we have the 4th of July coming up, our Independence Day. And we won that war. So we don't build statues here to King George III or fly the Union Jack. We went to war against Japan. We have plenty of British Americans here, plenty. They don't build statues to King George III. We went to war against Japan when they bombed Pearl Harbor in 1943. We have plenty of Japanese Americans here. They don't build statues to Japanese leaders during that era or fly the Japanese flag for that. We won, they lost. We went to war against Germany. There are plenty of German Americans in this country whose ancestry were under the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler. We don't build statues to Adolf Hitler or Joseph Goebbels or Joseph Mengele and fly the swastika. Germany lost the war. The Confederacy lost the war. They need to get over it. We all have Confederate ancestors. I'm a descendant of slaves. My parents were from Virginia, even though I was born in Chicago. My dad got a job there. But Virginia was the seat of the Confederacy, Robert E. Lee, and all that. Slaves had to fight for their Confederate slave masters against blacks and whites and other people in the Union Army. While I honor my ancestors, because without them I wouldn't be here, I personally do not honor slavery or the Confederacy. But if somebody else, and believe it or not, there are some Black people who do honor the Confederacy. And I've met some. We have some right here where I live. But if they want to do that, that's fine. But they lost the war. Take your statues, put them in a museum, put them in a Confederate park, and go there and honor them. The loser does not get to fly his flag or his statue, except for on land where he won.
I am reminded of this movie, Glenn Ross. And I'm just like, yo, statues are for closers. All right. You don't get that. You don't get that. Thank you, Daryl. Man, it's a real good analogy.
We're getting close to the end of our allotted time here. And this has been moving and so meaningful. I'm again going to try to consolidate a bunch of questions into one. I guess this is the more prescriptive moment. The question that I'm getting from a lot of people of all races is, what can I do now to be most effective?
Oh, wow. All right, I'm gonna try to be short. It could be very tempting and easy and even righteous and accurate to point out the injustice like over there. I think a very meaningful step for all of us to take toward building a more anti-racist society is to examine the places we have the most power. Our households, our budgets, our companies, if we have those still during all of this tumultuous time, and examine the choices that we're making with our dollars, with our attention, with our loyalty to try to decolonize the way we're acting in those spaces. And so that might mean, especially for white people, Rev D mentioned this earlier, like keep digging into that conversation. Brianna mentioned this too, like it's gonna be hard. We need you to keep doing that. But it also may be about where your business is banking. And it can be really cool to like hang a Black Lives Matter banner out the front window. But if you're not hiring Black people, if you're not serving Black people, if your money's not helping create wealth in a Black community that's been stripped of wealth for hundreds of years, that banner is not nearly as meaningful a gesture as the operations of your organization. So I would just look for opportunities very close and deeply within your own sphere of influence and try to make difference there.
And not everybody has to be on the front lines, marching in the street. So, for some people, that's not their thing. They can take another more subtle approach. If people have legal knowledge, help out in the legal field. You know, people have ability to communicate with others. They have a copy shop. Make copies of posters advertising what's going on. Print things up for people. Disseminate information and material to people who are on the front lines, or for those who want to join the front lines. It's just like making the movies. You know, you have the actors up front, and you have the people who set up the staging and behind the camera and all that, people you don't see. But it takes all of those people to make that film successful. So there are plenty of roles people can play. They don't have to think that they have to be out there on the street if that's not their thing. But we all have to participate in this together. And I'm very grateful for all the other ethnicities who have joined us in these marches, because before, you know, the people that we were pleading to were like this, with their hands over their ears. They didn't want to hear us. And now they're seeing people in these marches, a lot of people in these marches who look just like them. So they're pulling the earplugs out, or else putting in the hearing aids or something, because they're beginning to listen. And as I said before, the page is beginning to turn. We're not at the end of the book. We're not even at the end of the chapter, but at least the page is turning. And that's what we need. That collective voice is what's doing it now. And we need more of that and keep that momentum going. And people like you, Misha, you know, I'm so grateful. We all are grateful for, you know, for you taking the time out of your schedule to disseminate this information to people. And, you know, that's fantastic, because you've got a platform, you know, that reaches a wide audience. People are listening, people are being inspired, people are beginning to think. And, you know, this is another thing people can do to influence the people that they know and reach out to their network. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Brianna?
The first word that comes to my head is diversify, and that is in your friend group, in your network, where you work, the pages you follow on social media, changing what you purchase, like supporting Black-owned businesses, taking a look at what you buy actually, and how much of the stuff you own is actually made by white people, and seeing how many companies out there are Black-owned and make the same thing that you would also love, but just diversifying that way. Speaking up, sharing space, like Daryl said about Misha, sharing platform space, shouting out people, whether it's artists you love, photographers who take your photos, podcasts that you listen to, any sort of way that you can help amplify the voices of Black people and people supporting this movement. And like Daryl said, taking and finding what works for you. I said last time, if you're more of creating backpacks for people who go out marching and wanting to be an emergency contact, there are so many different ways that you can help do this work. And I know a lot of people have been talking about burnout, and it's a real thing. So also remembering to take that time and just, you know, instead of maybe walking, you just have conversations with people, finding what fits for you and helping to create more space.
Thank you. Rev D, you want to close us out?
Yeah. You know, at the risk of sounding absolutely cliche, keep hope alive. There's an acronym that's come to me about that. We're ability and engagement. Keep your heart open, stay in possibility consciousness, and stay engaged. Too often we get discouraged, and now is not the time to get discouraged. I would recommend, when I look at like all of the things that you could possibly be doing, stay upstairs is what I call it. Pain pushes until vision pulls. And there's too many of us now who want a better world, but all our talk is negative. So it's like when something's trending, you don't know whether it's pro or con. Everybody's just in that story. And I can tell you now, as a movement builder, you have to spend a lot of time dreaming, visioning, speaking life into what you want. You can't just be complaining about what's going on, but where it's so real that you're really living it. You know, as a matter of fact, tomorrow afternoon, I'm doing a workshop from 2 to 4 Pacific time called Pulled by Vision. And it's an interactive workshop. Bring pencil, it's free. Bring blank paper, markers, crayons, and whatnot, because I'm going to be teaching people how it is that we control the narrative of what we want to say about social justice issues. So what comes out of our mouth is in alignment with our highest values. It's free. It's called Pull by Vision. My website, my website, Facebook, Reverend Deborah L. Johnson, or Inner Light Ministries. We're doing it in conjunction with Temple Bethel. But keep the hope alive. Don't let the despair wear you down. That to me is the most important thing than anything right now.
If I can just add on to that, keep the hope alive. And as Martin Luther King said, he who walks in silence hangs the innocent and lets the guilty go free. So you see something, say something.
Well, thank you all so much. I know I feel buoyed by hope hearing you talk and seeing your faces. And I'm deeply grateful to all of you for all of your work and for all of your thoughtfulness and for sharing your time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for getting the gang back together.
Yes.
This is dope.
Blessings, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Till
Bye.
next time.